Hi everyone, and welcome to another Bowls Australia Zoom catch-up. And I'm branching out. I've got two guests with me today. And the first, of course, is a familiar face to all bowlers out there. It's Bowls Australia CEO Neil Dalrymple. How are you, Neil?
Good, thanks, Clive. How are you?
Good, thank you. And we've got a special guest with us. I'll leave you to do the introductions.
Thanks, Clive. Yeah, no, Hutchie, it's great to have you on board today for this call. I just wanted to give some context for the viewers out there. So Bowls Australia have been working with Crocmedia. So Craig Hutchison is appearing today. And the relationship goes back now, I think, Hutchie, some 10 or so years. We started with radio. We continue with radio today, but we've branched out into a number of areas. And I think just for the viewers to let them know that we're producing a radio show through Crocmedia. We're now producing all our television through Crocmedia. Recently, we produced a magnificent marketing campaign, Local Legends Wanted, which has been awesome. And part of that campaign now, you're helping us with the actual media buy and getting that particular campaign out there really publicly. So some of it also includes some general marketing advice, which, I mean, it's part of the range of suite of services that Crocmedia now provide. And I suppose from a Bowls Australia perspective, Hutchie, we can't be more pleased with the relationship and the staff that we work with at Crocmedia. And, I'd just like to, I suppose, put on the record, we really appreciate it. And it's great to have you here today to talk a bit about what's going on in the world and obviously the sports, the media landscape. And so great to have you. Thanks, Hutchie.
Thanks, Neil, and thanks, Clive. Yeah, I'll pass that feedback on to our team and our Rainmaker television business and our broader Crocmedia business, and they'll be wrapped. They work very hard, and we generally love bowls at our business. It's a very authentic part of our business, and we've long admired the way you and the board have led the sport. So we don't enter into big commitments lightly. We don't believe in the sports and where they're headed, and I think it's a great credit to the leadership of you and the board and the states and the work that you've done to stay connected. And never has that been more seen than in this last 2 months when some parts of the country differed to others for periods of time of what was and wasn't permissible in the world of bowls. That was a very complicated thing for your sport to go through, like it was in most sports. I think the way that you doubled down on content and have been able to create the bowl show on 7/2 and remain connected to fans and replace their experience a little bit for those that couldn't attend. It's different weather in different parts of the country. So you've got some parts of the country are used to being a little quieter this time of year, and others it's where it's almost sort of dial-up stage. But what's been clear through it all, with this, whether it be the user-generated content or the feedback on your Facebook or the feedback with our bias radio or the feedback into the television platforms, is just how much people love the sport. It's really, whether it be elite level and the innovation going around BPL and the Australian Open and its success over the years, or whether it be really at your local community and your just friendship product. I think the warmth of the sport shone through, and I think it bodes well for the future for Bowls Australia.
Actually, give us an idea. Obviously, at Crocmedia, it's creative times, isn't it? Because it's been challenging times out there in terms of coming up with content and keeping advertisers happy and so forth. Give us an idea of what's been going on there.
Well, it's been a bizarre time, Clive, because I think what we've learned more than anything is that how much people love sport. And it doesn't matter what sport you're in, it's loved. And it's not until you take something away from people in life that they really love it and appreciate it. And I'd go a step further. In this country, we can from time to time, albeit subliminally, take it for granted. Like here in Melbourne where I live, going to the MCG is not often for many people that dissimilar to going to the local pub or the local milk bar. Whereas if you live in some countries in Europe, it's a yearly event to go to a game of sport. We've got such an abundance of choice. I think here in Melbourne, we've always said we're the sporting capital, but we've proved it over the last couple of months because of our fanaticism about what we're missing. And then content is a very big part of the sport experience. It's the enabler. Historically, a lot of sports are built on attendance and participation. Those two things have been afflicted, but the love of sport hasn't been, and the ability to serve content to them is dialed up. If you look at the trends, Clive, radio has grown significantly through COVID-19, even though people are in cars less. Yep. Television has grown significantly, and digital has boomed, and live streaming has boomed. And environments like this, and the innovation you're showing here by having a Zoom series on your Facebook, fantastic. And I think long may it continue. But, you know, would you have been this aggressive 6 months ago? Maybe not quite as much. So, you know, sports are having to pivot into being made for media for a period of time. Now, you can look at that two ways. You can be, woe is me, and we haven't got fans, and, you know, people can't come in, and our event revenues are affected. Or you can try and be opportunistic and, you know, make innovation and create deeper connection via media. And that's what excites me. It's done against a backdrop of we're all working on less resource than we're used to, clearly, and it depends how many resources you've been afflicted by and what your business is. But no one's got more resources than they did coming in. And you're obviously got to work within your means. And then there's less brands or sponsors probably around to partner the things you want to do because businesses have been hurt. But it can be a really good time. And I think what we've seen from the bowls community is it unite. We've seen everyone come together and understand they want to protect the sport for the next 10, 15 years. And often it can galvanise these times. And that's what we're seeing, I think, in the bowls community.
Hutchie, with the sorry, Clive, with the bowl show, Hutchie, I think that's been it's been really well accepted by the community out there, and I think some obviously members of the bowls community don't quite, I suppose, understand the commercial impact and the opportunity or the opportunity we've created to connect with those partners, those very loyal partners that have stuck with us because we've created some content and brought the bowl show forward from when originally it was going to actually be screened. So I think that's been certainly welcomed by the partners, and obviously, as you said before, it's created some content for the bowls community to watch. But the partners, keeping the partners in this climate is obviously really important.
Yeah, I think it's full credit to you. Now, I don't mean to issue praise just because you're on the call, but it took some leadership, and it wasn't necessarily a brave decision, but it was the harder of the two paths to take is pull your content forward when it was otherwise going to run in May or June onwards. I think it was great leadership because what Bowls Australia has now is partners who are on the journey for it for a long period of time, and they're growing and they're invested and they want to be part of the content cycle, and they want to talk to people when the audiences are high and at their most engaged. And clearly, if you are in the bowls community and you're one of the 600,000 participants and those that just admire the sport, and you can't actually go and play on Saturday, well, then the next best thing you can do is engage from a content perspective.
Yep.
And then from a brand point of view, I want to be talking to those people when they're at their most engaged. And brands have all got different times and cycles. You know, some of the Bowls Australia brand partners are very active now in their businesses and are less affected. And it's a good time for them to be talking to audiences. So I think what we've seen through this is the brands are on the ride with Bowls Australia. They understand the vision and the connection point.
Yep.
And I think it also was an opportunity. You know, how often would Bowls get on free-to-air television on a time when they didn't have to compete with AFL, NRL, A-League, Super Rugby? You know, there wasn't a lot of content on. So to go and fill that void and introduce the sport to perhaps a new audience who might not have otherwise on a Sunday had the time, effort or inclination to watch it, and then realise, you know, this is pretty good and this is warm content and this is a lot of fun in the way it's designed. And then, gee, I didn't catch much of the BPL previously, but how cool is it the way that the characters are engaged and the format and the music? And so for me, I was really incredibly proud of the work that you guys did to do that, because it exposed the sport to a new audience, and that's ultimately the continual challenge. It rewarded existing audience, rewarded existing partner, and it also was brave enough to delve into a new audience.
I really like your reference to opportunity. I think with a coverage of a lot of sports, and of course you've got a unique position, Hutchie, in terms of seeing a lot of different sports and how they're going about things. Sports can drop into a formula, if you like. This is the way we do things. This is the way we promote. And this time's really challenged sports to think about how they can do things a little differently, and they might come out better off in the future as a result.
Well, it's hard in anything to drive change, Clive, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what this COVID-19 period has done is given people permission to change. Often it's a barrier to change is often self-inflicted. As our business looks, acts and behaves like an agency. So we like to feel that we're forever changing, but we, like anyone, get into the routine of being, formatic. I'd like to try and challenge our people to create as much change as we can, because it's ultimately, if you're getting better today than yesterday, then you're moving forward. But I've experienced that in sports like basketball and in others where there's a lot of great things going on, and you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But when a time like this comes along, it's almost like it's permissible to try things. And ultimately, that's what we're all built on. Like if some things, I fully accept that of this 50 or 60 things we've tried in the last 8 weeks, that hopefully most of them work, but some of them won't have. And there might be one where you're a spectacular failure. But if you don't try, you can't move forward. And I've felt really bad about a lot of the circumstances of COVID-19, and that mainly for staff and the community and people afflicted from work and lost revenue and businesses. It's been horrible to watch many small businesses. One of the small positives, if there can be such a thing as a positive, is that we've seen more innovation and permission to change and permission to try things. And the way people have pivoted their businesses has been really impressive. And I've learned a lot from a lot of the partners we work with on how they've pivoted their businesses.
In terms of your crew on board I want to talk about covering games without crowds and things like that. Yep. It's a different approach, isn't it? I mean, you've got to fill different areas because often you'd switch to a group in the crowd or create some atmosphere that way. Does that put more pressure on people like the commentators and the production crew to create that atmosphere?
Well, I think it becomes a greater honour because it's your job to create the atmosphere for the viewer. I mean, in radio, it's less challenging than telly, I think, if you wanted to split the two. Radio has always created theatre of the mind. As a kid growing up as a Geelong supporter, I would listen to 3GL, and I probably didn't see Geelong play on television until the Sydney Swans games came in. You'd see them once a year on a Sunday afternoon. My first 5, 6, 7 years of the image of the game was on the evening news highlights, Seven's Big League with Peter Landy, or, listening to the game and being soaked into the atmosphere via the radio. Radio has a greater role than ever to play in every sport in creating the theatre and the atmosphere and the excitement. And I think it's natively been pretty good at that anyway. For telly, it's a different challenge. For television, it'll need to be a lot more energy put into broadcast than it used. Like normally television, you let the pictures tell the story. You can let the crowd ambience create the atmosphere. We've seen that in bowls, obviously, with some of the innovation in grandstands in recent years. But it'll be a harder job for TV broadcasters. It'll need to be shot a bit differently to kind of eliminate mass empty seats because no one wants to be reminded of it all the time. I think if you go back to the NBL finals in March, that was when COVID-19 was just starting. Crowds were limited to 500. And the way that the NBL was able to make 500 feel like 10,000 was really impressive. So we'll see a bit more of that. But the role of media has never been greater, and the audiences will never be stronger. So I think it's an opportunity as well.
Let's talk more specifically about bowls, because I know you're big on the opportunities for bowls in this space as well. Give us your thoughts on what's out there for bowling clubs and for bowls in general.
Yeah, well, the first thing I'd say is that we're seeing mass community support come through this period. Like everyone's focused on their community, on their neighbourhood, on their suburb. And bowls has always been a brilliant part of a community. It's a centrepiece. It's one of those things in a town that defines the town. So that's heightened for me. I think that's a greater opportunity. And the second thing is I think domestic tourism is an incredible opportunity for bowls. So, it's indisputable over time that there's domestic tourism hikes or lifts or sometimes booms on the back of kind of global events. You look back at the 2008 and the meltdown financially, or you look at 9/11 when people didn't want to travel for a year and a half, 2 years. Getting out of Australia to anywhere probably other than New Zealand is going to be a real challenge. One, for a year and a half, 2 years. Two, are people really going to want to do it even if they can for a period? And three, are they going to be actually able to afford it? So what that brings into sharp focus for me is we're feeling more Australian than we've ever been. Like I spoke on the Australian Made webinar the other day. The Australian Made business, media, digital traffic, every metric out of control, like off the charts. People are connecting more with our country. I think we're going to be more inclined to want to go and take a caravan away for 3 days or head up to the Gold Coast with the family, or stay in a caravan park, or go and see some towns we haven't seen. People might drive to northern New South Wales rather than fly. They might replace their once a week holiday overseas with a once a week holiday domestically. And then I think caravanning, camping, a lot of things that, you know, are quite adjacent to bowls, particularly in some parts of northern New South Wales, southern Queensland, Western Australia.
That's a really good point, actually, because it's going to bring people in more contact, isn't it? Where they might just fly over the top normally. They're going to have those opportunities to stop in.
We're going to get around our country more, and we're going to see our towns more. I'm going to connect. And the other thing what's happened, Clive, which sounds a bit insensitive, but we've connected more deeply with our own families. So I think we're going to be a little bit more inclined to want to go away and recreate that for a week here and 2 weeks there. And bowls speaks to all generations. You know, it's often pigeonholed as one generation than another, and that it has stronger demographics, but it is for everyone. It's a sport you can play with your grandparents or your school neighbour. And I think the chance for bowls to kind of try and intersect that experience and be a once or twice played sport as people move around is huge. And I think the other thing is people are going to love their Saturday or their Wednesday experience because it got taken away from them. And how do we take 30 people at a given time to 40 or 60 people to 80? How do we grow our sport just by the adjacencies that sit around it? So that's a really good opportunity, I think. And I know a lot of the clubs will be thinking about that, I'm sure. And people really appreciate their communities more. You know, they're buying more remotely food from local vendors and local establishments. They're doing it differently. I think Bowls' ability, because of its footprint, because of its clubs, to play a role in those towns more deeply and support those towns as they work through it is huge.
You see, Hutchie, the response that golf has had in Victoria. I mean, I think as a golfer, it's quite fascinating that, and given that Victoria were they were the last state, I think, to open up golf, but the rush back to golf courses is extraordinary. And I mean, I know some family members of, you know, they're buying clothes online, and so the purchasing habits are different, but they're wanting to get the gear to get back out there. So I think we've actually got a Zoom call with some of our licensed manufacturers this afternoon, and we're going to talk to them about the opportunity to be creative and offer up some clothing and bits and pieces to get people, as people come back on the green in bowls, and get your gear, get it ready. So
no doubt, it can almost begin a whole new season feel to bowls, and I think hopefully the manufacturers seize the moment on licensing and apparel and you know, creating an excitement. I mean, golf is a great example, Neil, that you mentioned. Now, golf suffers from the perception that it's a declining sport. It's a changing sport, and it's unfairly depicted as a declining sport. If you ask the average everyday person on the street, not as many people play and haven't as much time, but what was missing in the narrative of golf was just the fanaticism and the passion, and how much it meant to people's lives. And I think people that played it, even. Well, you and I, you played better than I do, Neil. But we're both not world beaters. Let's be honest.
I'm going to say just.
But it's one of those sports that fits the taken for granted category. When it's removed from us, we saw marches on the steps of Parliament, and how can golf be not allowed, and countdown to the day, and all of a sudden now getting a tee time's like getting that's the slot, right? I've got a 10 tee off on Saturday. How good's this? Whereas 2-3 months ago, we just took it for granted. So I think all sports will have their own version of that. I think bowls has got a great opportunity to tap into the recreation, and to use your language, Neil, back on the green. I heard Barry Lester say on a call recently, and Barry's a great media identity, that he'd seen people just peering over the fence at their local club and kind of longingly and leaning on the fence and thinking about what it'd be like to be back. That really resonated with me, because I think that speaks a little bit to a lost part of your life, self-reflective, appreciative of how much you love it, and then we won't take it for granted again. And I'd encourage and hope all those in the bowls community who did feel that way, perhaps share that with someone close to them and encourage them down to their local bowls club to be part of their experience, because seeing their happiness will be contagious. And that's a great way to grow the sport, by just perhaps talking and sharing about your loss of the sport for a little period of time from a participation perspective.
I think that's spot on. And Neil, of course, we've seen some events that have had to be cancelled, World Bowls and so forth. But that's an opportunity now for people to plan one of these adventures that that Hutchie's talking about, have a think about it. And yes, we can get back on the greens locally, but gee, what an adventure, a road trip up to, to watch the World Bowls or so forth next year when it will be held. And stop in and see some of the clubs along the way through.
And I think so. Talking to some of the clubs, Clive, that's the sort of feeling at the moment. Whilst competitions are important, I think they want to fill the greens. They want to get the business of bowls happening again too, and that means getting people out on the green. And it's not just the members; it's obviously visitors. People from the local community coming to have a bowl at the local club. And I think everyone's wanting to get out and do something. And bowls, as you say, Hutchie, we're well positioned as a sport. We have a piece of the land in every basically municipality across Australia. So we're ready to go. We just need to, I suppose, fire up our people, our volunteers, our paid staff who work in clubs and get them ready to open the doors. So it's going to be exciting, I think.
And I think the energy that you have around that footprint is so huge. And I know you're well served by so many people around the country. They'll be ready to go and they'll sense the excitement of what's ahead, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah. Good.
Hutchie, has the way we're going to consume sport changed forever? Is it a forever change? Will it get back to the way it was? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think anything will ever get back to the way it was. There'll be variations of it and innovations from it. I was probably in the early days of COVID-19 saying, well, our business is that's what our business was. It'll be different. I think everyone's the same. I think the role of media and communication has been underpinned more than ever before. You need a really strong communication strategy as a sport to be able to communicate on scale, because you can speak to 1 million people via media, or you can speak to 200 people at a venue, and they're a fair way apart. A lot of legacy was in sport of attendance versus social participation or online participation. I think from a content perspective, we'll consume things much differently. I think those environments that have grown through this, radio, television, digital, are all going to keep growing. People have got it takes, it takes 7 weeks for something to become, go from a habit to becoming a permanent part of your life. Well, we've all passed that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And I think that's great, but there'll be some things that modify and change a little bit, and there'll be other things that we do more and more of. I'll give you an example with me, Clive. I was on a plane every day somewhere.
Yep.
I'd often go to a city for 1 or 2 meetings. I think that's forever gone for me. Like, I'll still travel around, but I won't, I'll be much more smarter and strategic, and we'll have many more calls like this than I did before. It's become much more acceptable.
These tools were there, weren't they? But they've just been highlighted as how useful they are right now.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the app House Party, which took off in the early days of COVID-19. People think that it was invented that day. It had been there for ages, So the way we want to stay connected will change. It will. We'll need to, spend more time with our people and colleagues, and there'll be recreations of that permanently online in a digital perspective. And I hope, I admire what you're doing here. I think it's great. I hope that we see more and more of content like this.
Good.
That's excellent. Look, we really appreciate your time, Hutchie. You're obviously a busy man, and we really appreciate your time you're spending with us to have a chat, not only with Neil and myself right here, but all of our people that are enjoying our Zoom catch-ups. So thank you very much.
I had one question for you, Clive, which is a bit offbeat before we finish.
Here we go.
With the first initial of C and the last name starting with AD, how many times do people accidentally dial your number because it's the first in their phone?
It does happen. It does. It does happen. So
I don't think I've ever thought of that.
I'm forever misdialing someone who's got an A in my phone. I thought, gee, CAD, that's a disaster waiting to happen. Hey,
yeah,
Clive,
no, the pocket calls do happen. Yeah.
The pocket calls. Thanks, Clive, for the opportunity to have a chat. I really appreciate the work you're doing and keeping everyone connected in bowls. And Neil, I really appreciate your support. Thanks for including me in today's session.
Thank you.
Again, just to encourage all the bowls community out there to chin up, be proud. It's a brilliant sport, and there's wonderful times ahead.
Thanks for your time, Hutchie.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.